For years, the Linux ecosystem has quietly grown into one of the most important foundations of modern computing. It powers servers, supercomputers, cloud infrastructure, mobile devices, and increasingly even gaming systems. Yet, despite this massive influence, the Linux desktop world has largely avoided the intense regulatory scrutiny faced by major commercial technology platforms. That situation may now be changing. Across several U.S. states, new laws and proposed bills are beginning to target operating systems and app distribution platforms with requirements related to age, verification, and user identification. While these laws are often presented as measures designed to protect children online, they are creating serious concerns within the open-source community about privacy, feasibility, and the future structure of Linux itself. The story unfolding right now involves lawmakers, open-source developers, privacy advocates, and even one of the most powerful gaming companies in the world. At the center of the controversy is the question of how governments should regulate digital platforms that host games, applications, and online services. Several states, including California, Colorado, Illinois, and New York, have begun pushing for legislation that would require operating systems or app stores to verify the ages of their users. In theory, the goal is simple: prevent minors from accessing harmful content and regulate things like gambling-style mechanics in games. But when these ideas are applied to open platforms like Linux, the situation becomes far more complicated. Unlike traditional commercial operating systems that are controlled by a single corporation, Linux is an ecosystem built from thousands of independent projects and contributors. There is no single company responsible for Linux as a whole. Instead, there are distributions created by communities, companies, universities, and volunteers all over the world. Some distributions are small hobby projects maintained by a handful of people, while others are major commercial products used by businesses and institutions. Because of this decentralized structure, implementing a universal age verification system across Linux distributions is not only technically difficult, but also philosophically controversial. Age verification systems typically require collecting personal data from users. This might include government identification, biometric information, or other forms of verification that prove a person's age. In centralized platforms like large social media networks or corporate operating systems, these systems can be implemented by a single organization that manages accounts and infrastructure. But Linux was never designed around centralized identity systems. Most distributions allow users to install software freely without registering accounts or submitting personal information. This openness is one of the defining characteristics of the platform. The proposed laws in states like California and New York could potentially force operating systems to adopt new mechanisms that verify whether a user is a minor before allowing access to certain applications or services. For proprietary platforms, this might mean updating their app stores or account systems. For Linux distributions, however, it raises questions about whether such requirements could even be enforced. Many developers argue that forcing open-source projects to implement mandatory age verification would fundamentally change the nature of the Linux ecosystem. Some Linux distribution maintainers are already discussing what they might do if such laws are enacted. One option being considered is restricting access to downloads in certain regions. That might sound extreme, but for small open-source teams with limited resources, complying with complex regulatory requirements may simply not be possible. Implementing identity verification systems requires infrastructure, legal oversight, and ongoing compliance management. Many community-run distributions operate entirely through volunteer efforts without the budgets or legal teams that large corporations rely on. This is where the broader debate begins to intersect with privacy concerns. Critics of these laws argue that mandatory age verification creates a dangerous precedent. To verify someone's age, platforms may need to collect sensitive personal data. Once that data exists, it must be stored somewhere, and any large database of personal information becomes a potential target for misuse, surveillance, or security breaches. Privacy advocates warn that such systems could gradually transform the open internet into a space where users must constantly prove their identity before accessing digital services. The Linux community has historically been one of the strongest defenders of user privacy and autonomy. Many people choose Linux precisely because it allows them to control their computing environment without being tracked or profiled by corporate platforms. Introducing mandatory identification systems into that environment would represent a dramatic shift in philosophy. Instead of anonymous or pseudonymous participation, users could find themselves forced to submit personal documentation simply to install software or run applications. While these debates were already intensifying, another major development entered the conversation. The Valve Corporation, one of the most influential companies in the gaming industry, has become involved in a legal battle related to similar regulatory concerns. Valve operates Steam, one of the largest digital game distribution platforms in the world. Steam is not only widely used on Windows, but has also become a major driver of gaming on Linux thanks to technologies like Proton and the popularity of the Steam Deck. The legal dispute centers on a lawsuit filed by the New York Attorney General concerning loot boxes in video games. Loot boxes are digital items that players can purchase or earn within games, which then deliver randomized rewards. Critics argue that these systems resemble gambling mechanics and can be particularly problematic for younger players. Some regulators believe platforms should implement stronger protections, including verifying the ages of users who interact with such systems. Valve's response to the lawsuit has drawn significant attention because the company is reportedly resisting demands that would require extensive data collection or invasive verification processes. According to statements associated with the case, Valve has raised concerns that implementing certain verification mechanisms could impact users far beyond the state of New York. Because digital platforms operate globally, regulatory decisions in one jurisdiction can ripple across the entire user base. If a platform like Steam were forced to implement strict age verification measures for one region, it might need to deploy systems that affect all users, not just those in that specific state. That could lead to widespread data collection practices that extend to millions of players worldwide. Valve appears to be arguing that such requirements could harm user privacy and create unnecessary technical burdens. This stance has resonated with many people in the Linux and open source communities. Valve has played a significant role in expanding gaming support on Linux over the past decade. Through investments in compatibility technology and hardware like the Steam Deck, the company has helped transform Linux gaming from a niche hobby into a rapidly growing ecosystem. Because of this relationship, many Linux users see Valve as an important ally in maintaining open and user-friendly computing environments. At the same time, the broader legislative landscape continues to evolve. Lawmakers pushing for age verification laws often emphasize child safety as their primary motivation. Protecting minors from harmful online content, exploitative monetization practices, or addictive game mechanics is an understandable goal. However, critics argue that the solutions being proposed may oversimplify complex technological realities. One of the challenges with regulating operating systems is that they function as general-purpose computing platforms rather than controlled content services. An operating system can run thousands of different applications created by independent developers around the world. Trying to enforce age restrictions at the operating system level may lead to unintended consequences. For example, should the operating system itself verify the age of every user before allowing them to install any software? If so, who would manage that verification process, and how would it be standardized across open source projects? These questions highlight the tension between centralized regulation and decentralized technology ecosystems. Linux was built around the idea that software should be freely shared, modified, and distributed. Many distributions allow users to download software packages directly from repositories without creating accounts or providing personal details. Introducing mandatory identity checks could disrupt this model and potentially discourage developers from contributing to open-source platforms. Despite these concerns, there have been some encouraging developments for the Linux community. In Colorado, discussions between lawmakers and representatives from the open-source world have opened the possibility of exemptions or modifications to proposed legislation. Carl Ritschl, the founder and CEO of System 76, reportedly met with a Colorado senator to discuss how age verification laws might impact open-source software. System 76 is a company known for producing Linux-based computers and developing the POP!_OS distribution. During these discussions, Ritschl reportedly explained that open-source projects operate very differently from commercial app stores or proprietary operating systems. Because they lack centralized control and often rely on volunteer contributors, imposing the same regulatory requirements could unintentionally harm innovation and collaboration. By educating lawmakers about these differences, advocates hope to create pathways that protect children without undermining open technology ecosystems. The fact that such conversations are happening at all is a positive sign for the Linux community. Many developers worry that policymakers sometimes misunderstand how open-source systems function. When legislation is written primarily with large corporate platforms in mind, it may accidentally capture projects that were never intended to fall under the same regulatory framework. Direct dialogue between lawmakers and open-source advocates can help prevent these misunderstandings. Still, the broader trend of increasing digital regulation is unlikely to disappear. Governments around the world are grappling with how to manage online safety, privacy, and consumer protection in an increasingly digital society. Age verification laws are just one example of the many policy tools being considered. Others include data protection rules, content moderation requirements, and regulations on digital marketplaces. For Linux and the open-source ecosystem, the challenge will be navigating these evolving legal landscapes while preserving the principles that made the platform successful. Transparency, decentralization, and user autonomy are core values within the open-source community. Any regulatory framework that conflicts with those values could trigger significant resistance from developers and users alike. Valve's position in the ongoing legal battle may influence how other technology companies respond to similar pressures. By challenging demands that involve extensive user data collection, the company is highlighting the potential global consequences of regional regulations. If courts ultimately side with platforms that prioritize privacy, it could establish important precedents for future policy debates. The outcome of these conflicts will likely shape the next phase of Linux's evolution. Over the past decade, Linux has expanded beyond traditional server environments into areas like gaming, creative workstations, and consumer devices. The rise of Linux-based handheld gaming systems, for example, has introduced millions of new users to the platform. As Linux becomes more visible in mainstream markets, it will inevitably attract more attention from regulators. Whether that attention leads to supportive policies or restrictive rules will depend largely on how effectively the open-source community communicates its unique characteristics to lawmakers. Unlike centralized corporate platforms, Linux thrives because it allows anyone to participate, innovate, and share software without barriers. Preserving that openness while addressing legitimate concerns about safety and consumer protection will require careful policy design. At the same time, the debate surrounding age verification raises broader philosophical questions about digital identity and privacy in the modern internet era. Should users be required to prove who they are every time they access a digital service? Or should the internet remain a space where individuals can explore ideas, download software, and communicate without constantly revealing their personal identity? Different societies may answer these questions in different ways. Some governments prioritize strict identity verification as a way to enforce laws and protect minors. Others emphasize privacy and freedom of expression. The tension between these approaches is likely to intensify as technology becomes more deeply integrated into everyday life. For now, the Linux community finds itself at a crossroads. On one side are legislative initiatives that could reshape how operating systems handle identity and access control. On the other side are developers and companies like Valve that are pushing back against measures they believe could undermine privacy and open technology. The coming months and years will determine how these competing forces interact. If exemptions for open-source projects become part of future legislation, Linux may be able to continue evolving without drastic structural changes. If not, developers may face difficult decisions about compliance, regional access restrictions, or alternative technical solutions. What is certain is that the conversation about privacy, regulation, and open computing is far from over. As digital technologies continue expanding into every aspect of society, governments will keep searching for ways to balance safety with freedom. For Linux users and developers, staying engaged in those discussions will be essential. The open source world has always thrived through collaboration and dialogue, not only among programmers, but also with policymakers, educators, and industry leaders. By explaining how decentralized systems operate and why privacy matters, the community can help shape policies that support innovation while addressing legitimate concerns. Valve's current stance in its legal battle may become one of the defining moments in that broader conversation. Whether the company ultimately wins or loses its case, its willingness to challenge invasive verification requirements has already drawn attention to the potential risks of sweeping digital regulation. For millions of Linux users around the world, the outcome of these debates could influence the future of their favorite operating system. What began as a discussion about loot boxes and age verification is rapidly expanding into a larger question about the rise of users in an increasingly regulated digital landscape. And in that landscape, the principles that build Linux, openness, privacy, and user control, are once again being tested.